Jackson Family Travelogue. My name is Avery Jackson. Last summer, my family went on a road trip adventure. We traveled from our home in Maine all the way to Florida, Acadia National Park. Our first stop was Acadia National Park in Maine. On the way there, Mom explained that the park has a lot of Native American history. Long before Europeans arrived, the Wabanaki people called the island where Acadia is located Pemetic, which means range of mountains. The Wabanaki have lived in the area for thousands of years. When we arrived, we got a map that showed all the great trails in the park. We hiked along a trail on the Schoodic Peninsula where the rocky shore meets the Atlantic Ocean. Waves crashed on the rocks below us. It was amazing. While we were walking up Cadillac Mountain the next day, I saw a bird called a peregrine falcon. It soared over our heads, its wings spread wide. Later, we went to the Abbey Museum. I learned more about the Wabanaki people. I saw their ancient tools and jewelry. Then we spent time at the tidal pools. During low tide, there are pools of seawater in the rocks along the coast. We saw lots of sea creatures in the tidal pools. I spotted crabs, sea stars, and barnacles. Every tidal pool is like a mini ocean full of sea life. The Statue of Liberty. Our next stop was New York City. I've always wanted to visit. First, we visited the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. We rode on the boat to get to the island the statue is on. A guide explained that a sculptor in France made the statue for the United States. It was a gift for the USA's 100th anniversary to remind us of how France helped during the American Revolution. During the early 1900s, millions of immigrants came to the United States from other parts of the world. Many came into New York because the city was a major port. The first thing they saw was the statue. The Statue of Liberty became a symbol of freedom and hope for all those people. Mom, Dad, and I climbed the stairs inside the statue. Good thing we're in shape because it was 377 steps to her crown. Lady Liberty is 34 meters, 111 feet tall. She is made of copper that has turned green over the years. After the Statue of Liberty, we visited nearby Ellis Island, also in New York Harbor. Ellis Island was the first stop in the U.S. for many immigrants. This small island was set up as an immigration station in 1892, but now it's a museum. In the museum, we listened to recorded stories of immigrants who came through Ellis Island. Some were separated from their families. Others had nowhere to go, but people helped find them a place to live. If you ask me, the immigrants were really brave. Today, thousands of immigrants come into the United States through lots of different places, not just New York. In New York, I also saw the African Burial Ground National Monument. From the 1690s to the 1790s, African Americans were buried in a cemetery in Lower Manhattan in New York City. Some of them were free men and women. Others were enslaved. Because the cemetery was covered over with landfills and buildings, it was not rediscovered until 1991. Cumberland Gap National Historical Park. We took a slight detour to visit my cousins in Kentucky. While there, we explored Cumberland Gap National Historical Park. I was a little tired from the long drive. I wondered what was so interesting about a gap. I was ready to be totally bored, but I wasn't at all. I learned that the Cumberland Gap is a narrow path through the Appalachian Mountains. For a long time, the gap was used by Native Americans like the Cherokee. Later, the gap was used by explorers. In 1775, a man named Daniel Boone made the path through the gap easier to travel on. The path became known as Wilderness Road. The path helped people move west, where they could find land to farm. As we walked along Wilderness Road, I imagined the hard work of clearing the way. The park ranger told us that Boone and 30 other men used axes to cut through the thick forest and swampland. No machines back then. It took a month for them to cut their way to the Kentucky River. I thought about all the Native Americans and pioneers who had walked that road before me. I felt pretty excited about following in those footsteps from so long ago. National Park cool fact. What's under the mountains in the Cumberland Gap? Caves. The caves were amazing rock formations, and lots of little brown bats live underground. Biscayne National Park. The last park we visited was Biscayne National Park in Florida. The weather was much hotter than in Maine, but that's okay because the park is on the water where the Atlantic Ocean meets the Florida coast. The park isn't just on the water, it's pretty much all water, 95% water to be exact. The park is close to the city of Miami, but I felt as if I was hundreds of miles away from anyone. We toured Biscayne on a glass-bottom boat. We could see under the water. It was like looking down into a fish tank. Below the boat were coral reefs. I took tons of photos of all the colorful fish that live in the coral. Early the next morning, we set out on a real adventure, scuba diving. We already had scuba diving training, so we signed up to dive near a shipwreck, a sunken steamer boat named Alicia. I couldn't wait to explore it. A boat took us out into the water. We put on our scuba gear and dove right in. The shipwreck wasn't too far down under the water. We swam all around it like fish. Most of the boat is in pieces. Lots of sea creatures live in the boat. I spotted a lobster. I looked for lost treasure, but I didn't find any. The Alicia is one of many shipwrecks in the area. I hope we can explore another one someday. The next morning we began our journey home. I was sad our trip was over. As we got into the car to head back to Maine, I thanked my parents for taking time on the road trip of a lifetime.